What's going on, producers? I thought today for this tutorial, what I discuss is a little bit about my workflow and how I go about doing things. I think in my first few years of producing, I was doing it wrong. I would sit down and I'd start these tracks and I'd start making more and more tracks. And then I realized that I wasn't finishing these tracks. I was just getting a whole bunch of ideas in my DAW and then kiboshing them. And I realized it took a little while, but over the past couple of years, I've been really focusing on separating my workflow ideas. You see, there's two different parts of producing. The first part would be sound selection, doing all the legwork to getting your songs done, finding sounds, or creating your own synth patches and whatnot. And then the second half is actually the creative part where you sit down and you write your music, which is more or less the really fun part about producing, is creating your songs. And I always used to do them together at the same time. I would sit down with a blank screen and I would just start plugging in samples and off I would go. And then I would go on a tangent and then try to fix something or change a sound or something, and then a song would not be getting done that day, and then wouldn't be getting done that week, and then I just ditch it and start another song. And like I said, and I found out a couple of years ago, there's better ways to going about doing this. And what I do is I separate the production process into two concepts. One which is basically your hunting, which is finding your samples or creating your patches, and then the second part, which is your producing, writing your songs, thinking about chord changes and melodies and drum beats and putting it all together. And the way I go about doing this and making it work for me is I go about creating drum kits. Now you know what these are. When you purchase your Loop Master packs or your Sample Magic packs, you get these kits in there with all these sounds already pre-selected for you. Or when you plug in your Native Instruments machine, you open up and it comes with like 60, 70 kits, and you go through them. And the problem is that you don't want to use those samples because even though they sound good, you don't want to use the kit because everyone has that kit. So you have no distinct individuality to your sound. You're just using everyone else's sounds. So what ends up happening is you end up picking a kick from one kit, a snare from another kit, maybe some samples from another kit, and you spend time hunting when you should be writing music. So what I do is I create my own kits, but I do it in a specific way. So let me tell you about it. This is the first thing I generally do when I'm preparing to write a song. I decide what genre I want it to be in, and then I find a loop, something, some kind of synth patch or bass patch or Rhodes or whatever it might be, and I find it, and I listen to it and I decide if this is the right one or not. So this is the one I chose. Now, this loop I won't be using in my song, but this is the general idea of the tone of the bass that I would like to have in the song, or the idea of the rhythm or whatnot. So I don't use the loop I choose, I just use it as a foundation to build a kit that I can use in the future. So now that I found the loop, the next thing I gotta do is I gotta find out what key it is. So since this loop came from a loop pack, it says here it's in the key of C sharp. What I've done is I've transposed it down to C to make it easier for this tutorial. So now this loop is playing in the key of C instead of C sharp. And the tempo for this is I'm keeping it simple at a buck 20. And once this is done and I've identified the loop, key, and the tempo, now what I do is I open up my drum machine. Now you can do this with NI Machine. You can do this with Groove Agent 4. You can do this with Arturia Spark. Virtually any drum machine, this should be possible that you can do this with. And what I do now is I set up the drum kit so that it's in general MIDI. So if you look here, I have kick, side stick, snare, clap, ghost snare, hats. And this is basically all general MIDI. If you don't know what this is, what you got to do is just go on the internet, Google general MIDI for drums, and you'll get a list of all the notes and what instrument should be placed on those notes. If you're wondering why I do this, it's because once this kit is done, I want to be able to reuse it over and over again and have all my kits organized the same way, so that if I, for example, in that Sample Magic pack that I purchased, I have drum loops that may have came with it, or hi-hat patterns that came with it. All I have to do is drag it into my DAW or into Groove Agent 4 here and play it, and it will play back the patch at the correct spot. Make sense? Awesome. So now that I basically have a drum kit with this setup here, all these are labeled with what sounds they should be. What I do is I go and I load the kit. And how I do this is I play the loop back, and I find samples for it, and I drop it in. And I try to make the samples work with the patch. So I do this for 2 levels, for 2 16 instrument banks on my drum machine, right? And all of them should work with the sample. Once this is done, then I take it to the next level. I create another 16, a bank of 16, and this bank is basically effects. And I make sure that all of these work with this loop. So we'll play it back and I'll give you an example of one. Right? And finally, once this is done, I create an additional bank. And this bank is usually used for synth shots, horn shots, any type of hits if you're making hip hop music, or cuts, bass shots that I can use in the track and spread them out over a sampler, and then play them as instruments in the track. Cool. So once this is done and I have my 4 banks laid out, the next thing for me to do is to tune everything. Now this is the major part of this tutorial, is sitting down and tuning your kit. So let's say I have my kick. This kick, I found one that was in the key C. It works perfect. And this snare, you can see, most of my samples are in C or within the key. And you see here, this one was not. I'll play the loop back and you'll hear this. It works with it. I put it back to the original key. Not very good, is it? Exactly. So you gotta sit down and you gotta tune your kit. This one I went up by a semitone. Tune your kit. Make sure you tune all 4 banks. So now what we've basically accomplished is we have a drum kit that we created with sounds for an electro style loop. Everything is tuned. The next step is to take it above this and set up your aux sends. So what you're going to want to do is apply some reverb. There's some reverb right there. And what we're going to do is set your reverb up for your kit, and then apply a gentle amount of reverb to your samples, to the amount that you want for the effect. And then you'll get a nice sounding kit. The final part of this is that once you have this kit set up, it's tuned, you have some reverbs and delays or saturation or whatever on your instruments that you choose. The next thing for you to do is to go and create patterns for it. Now what I've done here is I've created 16 different patterns for this drum kit. Let's take a look here. And if you've done it right, it should sound clean. Everything's tuned to the key that you've chosen. So all the notes would be in the key of C, would be C, D, E, F, G, A, and B. Right? And let's play back with the lead. Excellent. So now the final thing that you should do once your kit's done is basically save it with the name so that you know that this is an electro kit and this is in the key of C minor, so that when you want to pull up a kit for the key of C minor in electro house genre, you can yank this one out and use it as a foundation. You can always switch out a sample if you really think you have to. But there's so many samples in here. You got 4 banks of samples that you're never going to create the same song twice with it. I mean, look at it. Most producers are running 6 or 8 kicks in their library, and they cycle the same ones in their songs, right? They'll use the same snares or claps because they sound really good, right? But because there's so much percussion here, so many effects in here, that you can always have a song and just use one of them in the song. No one's going to know any different, right? So once you've gotten all 16 of these banks done, what you got to do is you got to find another 5 or 6 loops that are in the same genre and then test it out. So what we're going to do is I'm going to play it back using different loops here, and we'll take a little listen. And there you go. You see how it works on all these loops, all these with the patterns? So your sample selection is good. It worked out fine for you. And then if you really need to use this kit, let's say in the key of D or the key of B flat, you can always use the global transpose on your drum kit and then shift it down 1 or 2 semitones each, and it shouldn't really affect the samples that much. You won't lose too much quality on it. And that's basically it. What I do is I just create a whole bunch of these and save them in my libraries, and when I want to pull out a soulful house kit or dubstep kit, all I have to do is yank it out, and I basically have everything I need to start with. I got the drums there, I got some samples there, I got some effects, some percussion, and all I need to do is get creative. Build one of these every week. You got 52 in a year, you have enough kits to last you a very long time, and they're all personalized. You have your own individual sound. You will create your own sound this way. I hope this really helps. I mean, I know it works for me, right? So I hope this tutorial was good for you, and I'll see you soon. Cheers.